Hey everybody, I'm Michael. This is my review of Disney Twisted Tales number 8. So this is the 8th book in the series. It is based on Peter Pan. It's a dark, twisted version of the Peter Pan movie. Kind of. I will be honest up front, I did not like this book. I really didn't like this book. I'm giving it a 1 out of 10. It's interesting because I just read the Frozen book in this series, and this book sort of has the opposite problem that the Frozen book did. So the Frozen book tried to have every single scene from the movie, and this one, it has almost none of the stuff in the movie, besides for Wendy and Tinkerbell. Besides for them, this book has nothing to do with Peter Pan. So Peter Pan's not really in it. So Peter Pan shows up at the end. So like this part, this is all the Peter Pan stuff. This is all the Wendy and Tinkerbell stuff. The vast majority of the book, like 400 pages, no Peter Pan whatsoever. There's no Mr. Smee. Mr. Smee is a figment of Hook's imagination, so that's why he's not there. There's no crocodile. There's no Indians. There's no Wendy's brothers. Okay, they show up at the beginning and in an interlude, but that's it. They're not in the book. So this book definitely gets rid of most of the Peter Pan stuff. I'm not sure why. Does the author not like Peter Pan? Because it's basically, let's do Peter Pan with just Wendy and Tinkerbell. No Peter Pan in sight. The other premise of this book is that it's 4 years later. So it's 4 years after the start of the Peter Pan movie, where Peter Pan loses his shadow. So Peter has lost his shadow, and he's just sad and depressed and moping and hiding in Neverland. And now Wendy's old enough that her parents want her to get married, or they want her to become a governess, and she doesn't like that. Like, the option is have kids or raise somebody else's kids. She doesn't like that. So she decides to escape to Neverland. She trades Peter Pan's shadow to Captain Hook for passage to Neverland. And this was actually really dark. So the first, like, I don't know, 50, 60 pages were really dark. The part with the pirates especially, because the pirates are mean and creepy. This is really disturbing to talk about, but at one point there's a pirate that gets way too hands-on with Wendy, and he tries grabbing her and pulling her into the darkness so he can do things without other people seeing them. That is just super disturbing to have that implied in a Disney book. I'm sorry. But it gets worse. Captain Hook murders the man. So Hook pulls out a pistol, shoots the guy in the back of the head while he's 2-3 inches away from Wendy. So the dead body falls on her. I think the blood gets on her. It's just really disturbing. Really gross. Yeah. But eventually they arrive in Neverland, and Wendy goes to her imaginary house where she meets up with her pet wolf, Luna. And then they get attacked by a tentacle monster made of pantyhose. And in the meantime, Captain Hook visits his friend, the witch, Moira. He gets her books on necromancy so he can become a dark wizard. And again, this has nothing to do with Peter Pan. I mean, Dark Wizard Hook? What? I don't quite get it. Around this time, Tinkerbell shows up. So Tinkerbell factors in pretty big in this book. The majority of the book, like 200, 300 pages, is just Wendy and Tinkerbell by themselves exploring Neverland, trying to find Peter Pan. So the relationship between Wendy and Tinkerbell is kind of interesting. I mean, it's the most interesting part of the book, is seeing how they relate to each other, and they start off as enemies, and they slowly become friends. And Wendy's fascinated when she learns out more about the fairies and how their society is structured. And they fight these monsters called thysolites, which are like bees, except they have memories where their stingers should be. And there's a brief part where they actually do stuff from the movie. Like, they meet the Lost Boys, but it's actually the Lost People, because one of them is a girl. She's the leader of the Lost Boys. And the mermaids are there, and they try to drown Wendy, just like the movie. And then that's it. So we get like 3 chapters of stuff, which is actually in the movie, and then it goes back to just this big segment of things which were totally made up for this book. So, like, Wendy gets attacked by an animal called a Q-Curinal. I don't know how you pronounce it. And her shadow blinds the creature. That's how she's able to get Tinkerbell safe from the monster. And then she visits the Firsts, which is the gods of Neverland. So they go to this misty, shadowy place where the scenery changes depending on your perception. So Wendy sees a vast desert, and Tinkerbell sees a bunch of mud stuff. And the three gods of Neverland appear, and they don't want to help Wendy. Instead, they basically give her a lecture on how terrible London was in 1904. There's a lot of sexism, racism, and economic injustice. They're also mad at her for literary reasons, and that's another problem with this book, is that the author is just too fond of literary analysis. And it's fine, you can do literary analysis, but everybody does literary analysis on the book while the book is happening, and it really gets in the way of the story. So, like, for example, Captain Hook gets into fights with pirates over metaphors. So, like, the pirates say, oh, well, you're only chasing Peter Pan because that's a metaphor for chasing after your lost youth. And Hook says, oh, no, that's a Freudian analysis. I'm a Jungian. And, yeah, that's kind of a clever joke, but who watched the movie Peter Pan and thought, you know what? Hook is the kind of guy who would debate the accuracy of psychological metaphors. No, I mean, that does not all sound like a conversation that the real Captain Hook would have. And so the literary analysis sort of reaches its peak at this point, because Wendy escapes from the gods by writing her own story, which Neverland comes to life, because only by telling stories can you be free. And then she and Tinkerbell, they find Peter Pan by total accident, and Wendy decides she's going to be the hero of the story, because Peter Pan and Tinkerbell can't change. I mean, Neverland is a place where they can never grow old, but also they can't change because they are characters in reoccurring stories. So, you know, Peter Pan's never going to kill Captain Hook. Captain Hook is going to show up at the start of the next book, right? So the status quo is forcing them to always hit the reset button at the end of every story. Also, do characters and stories ever change? Because this book is going to be the exact same every single time you read it. The characters aren't going to do something different like the third time you read the book. So they're really stuck and can't change. So Wendy decides, no, because Peter Pan and Tinkerbell have no ability to perform personal growth upon themselves, I myself shall be the one who grows and changes. And yeah, that's all stuff that's in the book. I'm not making this stuff up. Wendy actually goes into detail about this and thinks about these things. It's like, why is this necessary? The idea is that Wendy, the main character of the story, is going to be a hero. That's great. That makes total sense that the hero is going to fight the villain. You don't need to perform like multiple pages of literary analysis to support this idea. They get the Lost Boys. There's a big fight with the pirates. They defeat Captain Hook, and they yell at Captain Hook some more because obviously he's just chasing metaphors. I feel like Captain Hook would be super offended by this, because it's not like he had a metaphorical hand cut off. No, his real hand was cut off. Like, if I was disabled and somebody told me, oh, well, your disability is just a metaphor, I'd be kind of mad too. So they defeat Hook. Hook is planning to blow up Neverland, so they manage to stop the bomb, and then Wendy goes back home, where she decides to become an activist, and she lives happily ever after. You know, she probably lived through both world wars, so her life was probably destroyed not too long after this. Whatever. That's where the book ends. So, like I said, I didn't think this was a good book. It just had very little to do with Peter Pan, almost nothing. Like, I could take a huge chunk of this book and just change the characters' names, and you wouldn't know it's based on Peter Pan. I also thought that the literary analysis stuff was just in the way of the actual story. And, you know, the book's kind of longer than it needs to be. It doesn't really need to be a 500-page book. It could have been a 300-page book. That probably would have been better. If you're a big fan of Peter Pan and you're looking for a sequel to the movie, I'd recommend the actual sequel to the movie, Peter Pan 2, Return to Neverland. Also the movie Hook, that's a very good sequel, which kind of does the idea of what's Peter Pan like 10, 20 years later. This book only does 4 years later, and Peter Pan's the exact same, so it's not as effective. I feel like older Peter Pan in the movie Hook worked better. Also, the Once Upon a Time series did a thing with Peter Pan. Captain Hook was the more interesting character in that, so is good. And I also liked Peter and the Starcatchers, which was a prequel series. That's decent too. So there's a lot of other like Disney Peter Pan stuff out there, which I would recommend before this one, because I did not like it very much. So I give Straight On Till Morning, which is Twisted Tales number 8, a 1 out of 10. Thank you for watching, everybody.